Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. We just finished Matthew 24 and 25, the Olivet Discourse. That's a beast, man. That's a big chunk of Bible. It represents 1/12 of everything we've done so far in the book of Matthew. I guess part of the reason I wanted today is just for buffering and reflection coming off of what, for me, was by far the most difficult 2 chapters of what we've done. Maybe you're feeling the same thing. Narratively and in terms of teaching, everything just flows so neatly through everything up to 24. But this Olivet Discourse, for a variety of reasons, it takes us to some different places and it adds a degree of challenge to unpacking it. I guess here are the things that I think have made it challenging. Rewarding, for sure, but challenging. First of all, it deals very specifically with stuff that's going to happen in the future. And everybody has a different view of how things are going to unfold in the future. Wherever you're coming from, religiously, a-religiously, politically, where you're at in life in terms of age can affect your degree of hope or optimism, or maybe you're more in a reflective place. We're all affected about how we think about the future just from our own buffer bar as creatures who live and age and die. And so the future seems like this really far away thing that you could talk pretty candidly about and everybody can have an opinion or whatever. But yeah, talking about the future, it gets to the level of the heart really quickly in weird and subtle ways that I'm not sure are immediately evident. And what people think about the future has tremendous bearing on what we think consciously and subconsciously about all kinds of other stuff. And so this is not an innocuous, consequence-free conversation working through chapters 24 and 25. It has bearing. It affects things, and it affects things in ways that we are not even conscious of. And we're all so different. We're all in such different places in terms of beliefs and convictions. Trying to do that in a way that brings everybody along for the ride and is thoughtful regarding how everybody's conceiving of the future, it's tough. So that presented a unique challenge, but again, I'm glad we walked through it. I think this passage is also tough because it gets into the business we were talking about yesterday and the day before with God's judgment. And it's much easier to talk about the stuff where God judges and corrects other people's bad behavior, and we feel good now because there is some justice in this world after all, and even if we don't see it in this world, it'll be there in the next. Like that stuff we like. Jesus saying nice stuff we like, Jesus breaking the laws of time and space and proving the values of his kingdom are real and defeating death, like that stuff we like. But when we get into the part where the tiger has claws, it's intimidating, and it really shows up here. And it's full disclosure on the part of Jesus. Like if he wanted to sell a religion and get people to just sign up indiscriminately and not think about it, a better way to do it would be to just go 100% nice with only lightly condemning remarks toward maybe an unpopular outgroup here or there, but he's going toe-to-toe with a pretty popular group that has a stranglehold on what's going on in society. And he's talking about justice and judgment that even goes beyond that group. I mean, it's pretty far-reaching in that he is fully disclosing that, no, we're talking about the God of everything, and the God of everything is the master of history, and part of that mastery of history is that God's grace and God's judgment are his to dole out the way he wants to, and all of his decisions are right, and it is a fearful thing, and here's what it looks like to orient oneself to that reality. And I suppose that's the third reason that these 2 chapters offer a degree of challenge, is because it really pushes the reader to go beyond kind of casually evaluating Jesus from a distance. Like, he speaks as one who has authority and not like other religious influences I'm around. I got some time. Let me just reflect on that, chew on it. I know by the time we get here to the home stretch of Matthew, it's like, you know what you need to know about who Jesus is and what his kingdom is and what his kingdom values are and where you might fit. And there's a timeline that gets attached to it, and that timeline is intimidating, and it makes it a little bit tougher to talk through, and especially a little tougher to talk through when you've got the degree of fart jokes that we have had in this podcast. Like they don't fit as neatly into the Olivet Discourse, and we need more fart jokes. So you got those factors that all come into play, but I think there's also a contextual factor that has added a degree of difficulty for us, and that is that Matthew chapters 24 and 25 seem to, on one level, be primarily dealing with the unfolding of history as it relates to the religious establishment of Jesus' time that is an extension and reflection of the religious establishment from centuries past. Jesus makes that really clear in chapter 23 with the 7 woes. Like he's like, no, this is not just you guys. This is you and the people you represent who came before you. There's a challenge to the Olivet Discourse because you got this kind of coming to a head of Jesus' understanding of the kingdom and what his invitation is versus the Pharisees' understanding of the kingdom, the religious establishment's understanding of what you got to do and who God is and what he's like. And there's definitely a judgment being spelled out. And so as modern readers, for most of us, like this Jew-Gentile sea change that is unfolding throughout the book of Matthew as Jesus comes as God in the flesh and brings about this reckoning and this fixing, this clarification for what had gone wrong religiously there. Like for you and me, we don't feel much of that tension because we're a couple thousand years after these events and it's kind of been sorted out. Like the people who latched on to the teaching of the Jewish leaders of the time, like they continued down that path. And in fairness, they made reforms, their understandings and religion evolved as well, but ultimately they landed in a place where like, we reject the idea of Jesus as Messiah. We reject the claim that he rose from the dead, and we are still awaiting a Messiah. A whole bunch of other people throughout history have gone the other direction and been like, that's compelling. That seems real. And a whole bunch of different expressions of Christianity have raised up that are all, and if it's Christianity, it holds to these values. They are all of the assumption that Jesus is God in the flesh, that he is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah, and that he was establishing his kingdom. And so as a result, like if you're anywhere in that Christian or Christian adjacent tradition, you're not looking back at Matthew and going like, oh man, which one is it? How does that all work? And what about Judaism and the temple and how that falls apart and 70 AD? That's crushing. It's just historical events. It's not really connected to you. It's not very personal for you. But Jesus is speaking to people for whom it was very, very, very personal in the moment. And if we accept the way that the text holds out Jesus in terms of his knowledge and his ability and what he's pointing toward here, he's trying to get them ready for 70 AD, the destruction of the temple. He's trying to get them ready for all kinds of suffering and difficulties that are coming down the pike. He's trying to get them ready for what proved to be a very serious reckoning for the temple system, the sacrificial system, and all of these seemingly unassailable religious leaders and their institutional ownership and control that they wielded. Like all of that stuff was about to get absolutely thumped by Rome. And for almost everybody in the early audience who read this as Matthew went into circulation in the coming decades, this idea of Rome cracking down on the religious establishment and there being a reckoning, that was either something they were starting to anticipate with dread, or it was an event that had just occurred and now they're looking back on it with dread. It was the biggest news for the readers of the book of Matthew that politically they could probably think of at all. It was a huge deal. And because of that, the Olivet Discourse takes us to a little different place as readers and as interpreters than the other discourses of Jesus in the book of Matthew do, in that we're having to transport ourselves into a separate theological debate, one that isn't really present for us and doesn't really need to be ultimately present for us because it looks like it's mostly resolved or sorted out. There's some stuff that obviously still points forward. And so because so much of the Olivet Discourse is set so firmly against the backdrop of this ongoing tension between Jesus and the religious leadership, but because some of the Olivet Discourse obviously also points toward just an ultimate end to history and what it looks like for the kingdom citizen to orient themselves properly, it just creates a few interpretive challenges that we maybe don't get in other places where we can more dispassionately just look at the story and be like, the Pharisees did this, Jesus did this. Is pretty easy to sort out and just be like, all right, well, that's part of the story. Now we understand the tension. Then all gets us to the cross and helps to make sense of this historical moment, this theological moment. Whereas here it's just a big speech from Jesus that has expectations on the kingdom follower, but it also still has the undertones of judgment that are uniquely directed at the religious leadership that the reign of the Son of Man that is held out here in the Olivet Discourse is going to replace. Further, I think the Olivet Discourse was really challenging because there's so many different Christian groups who've looked at this passage and passages like it and come up with whole systems for how things need to be. And those systems, it's hard to shake them. It's very difficult to sit under the influence of those systems and internalize those systems and then go back to the actual Bible and read it without those systems in mind. Just read it for what the thing is. And part of the reason that we did the pace that we did over the last couple of chapters is because I felt like, man, we kind of got to purge some of that stuff that's lingering in the back of our minds to see this thing structurally for what it actually is. I'm doing the thing again where I said we were going to get through all of this in one day. We're not going to get through all of this in one day. We're going to take 2 days to land the plane on 24 and 25. Today, we've talked about the challenges that come along with these passages. But with those things in mind, next time around, I want to talk about the breakdown. Let's just give it our best once-over look at what is actually happening in these 2 chapters and how that sets us up, what the stakes are for the last few chapters of Matthew as we land the plane. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow. Thanks a ton for doing this with me and for your grace with me as I honestly am working this through right alongside you. This has been a very meaningful examination of these 2 chapters for me, and I am grateful to you for that. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.